So that's why there's some interest in the Austrian school. And it's not correct to say the Austrians are always bearish, and so therefore a broken clock is right twice a day, and so they happen to be right. That's not true. You can find a few newsletter writers who have predicted 8 of the last 0 hyperinflations. That is true. But that is not true, by and large, of most of the professional economists who associate themselves with the Austrian school. The Austrians are realists in the sense that although we do use equilibrium constructs as mental tools, we're not obsessed with studying prices in long-run equilibrium. Long-run equilibrium can never occur in a world of change and uncertainty. So we're actually interested in, oddly enough, real prices. We actually want to study the actual prices that exist on the market. So this is our emphasis on realism. We want to actually study this economy, not an economy on Mars, not an economy in the never-never land of long-run equilibrium. And I know of an example of a gentleman who was going for, this is not a joke, was going for a job interview as an economics professor. And this was at a university in Virginia. And he went and he gave a whole model of the hamburger industry. And at the end of his presentation, Professor Gordon Tullock, a very accomplished economist, said, "Well, my complaint is that your model looks nothing like the actual hamburger industry." And the professor's response was, "I'm not interested in the actual hamburger industry. I'm interested in my model." And that, I think, kind of sums up some of the weird priorities of the profession today. So the Austrians are not interested in that. They're interested in the real world we live in. Now, I happen to be employed as a senior fellow at an institute called the Ludwig von Mises Institute, M-I-S-E-S. The Mises Institute is dedicated to promoting the Austrian School of Economics. Now, it's named after Ludwig von Mises, who was born in 1881, died in 1973. Mises led quite an extraordinary life. Of course, he lived much of his life in Austria. He eventually taught for a number of years in Switzerland, but he spent his adult life all the way till his late 50s in Europe. But of course, as a Jew, number one, and number two, as someone who believed in the free market and the international division of labor, he was not very popular with the National Socialists of Germany, who were not really interested in the international division of labor. They wanted autarky within a German empire. So naturally, Mises had to fear for his safety as the Nazification of Europe occurred. And the Nazis, in fact, seized his papers and books from his library in Austria, and so he ended up having to flee Europe. He came to the United States in his late 50s, almost empty-handed, not speaking a word of English. So this is 1940. It looks like that's it for this guy. That's it for his career. But it turns out he learns English. He starts writing, becomes productive in the U.S. In 1949, he releases his 900-page masterpiece published by Yale University Press called Human Action. And yet, at the same time, he could not get a paid university post in the United States. I mean, I believe, arguably, he may have been the greatest economist of all time. Now, this is a time when every no-name bum, every semi-Marxist is getting a prestigious chair at an American university. Mises has to take an unpaid post at NYU. His salary was paid by a consortium of businessmen who had the acumen to recognize what he was doing and the significance of his work. Now today, all those people who were hired over him are long forgotten. No one studies them. Mises has an institute named after him, and he's got a generation of young people studying from and profiting from his work. On my tie here, I have the shield of the Mises family, the coat of arms. And in one of the quadrants here, we have the Bible opened to the Ten Commandments. And it was sort of Mises' view that governments needed to learn that thou shalt not steal commandment. So that was one of his concerns. Well, the reason, as I say, that there's a lot of interest in the Austrian school is its explanation for booms and busts. So I do want to talk a little bit about that. The question has to arise, why are there booms and busts? Why does the economy move in this cyclical pattern? And it's not, I think, enough to say, well, that's just how the free market is. Well, what kind of explanation is that? In fact, that's Karl Marx's explanation, that the market, is full of these contradictions, alleged contradictions, and it's just going to go up and down, and that's just the way it is. And I think this conventional wisdom has been, by and large, accepted from the left all the way to the center-right, and even among some defenders of the free market, they'll say, well, these cycles happen, you got to take the good with the bad. But this question sort of demands explanation. Why as the British economist Lionel Robbins asked in his 1934 book, The Great Depression, why is there suddenly a cluster of entrepreneurial error? Because the market tends to weed out people who are bad forecasters of consumer demand. If you're bad at this, you make losses, and if you really stink at it, you go out of business. And that's the market's way of saying our resources are not unlimited, and we cannot allocate resources in such a way that people who are bad stewards of them get control of them. So people who are poor stewards of them find their capital flowing to other people who are better at this. So in other words, the market weeds out people who are no good at it and rewards people and gives them control over more resources who have a skill in this area. So the question would be, given that the market is already selecting for the best entrepreneur, why are these entrepreneurs all of a sudden, at the same time, making errors all in the same direction? I mean, this is a question that's not raised because we just take for granted, well, we've got a crisis and that's the end of it. Why is there the crisis? What is the source of the entrepreneurial cluster of error? And that's what F.A. Hayek, the economist, was looking to answer when he developed, really gave the meat to Ludwig von Mises' business cycle theory. Now, Hayek won the Nobel Prize for this theory in 1974, although he did most of his work on it in the 20s and 30s, when he was doing most of his intense economic work. Now, there are some conspiracy theorists who say Hayek won the prize in 1974, the year after Mises died, because the profession could never give Mises an award because he was such an uncompromising supporter of the free market. He would just be some old-fashioned dinosaur type. We could never reward him, but we could give it to Hayek. Well, I'm not sure I believe that, but nevertheless, it is odd that it's almost a half-century later that Hayek wins the prize for this work. And that bred a lot of interest in, who's Hayek, right? Who even is this guy? What does he have to say? And Hayek's argument basically goes like this. And to introduce his argument, I just need to introduce two concepts, and I'm sorry this is from my old days as a professor, for sort of lecture-y. I apologize for this. This is just a brief 3-minute interlude, but this will help us go through it. There are two things we want to know about the Austrian view of the world, Austrian School of Economics view of the world, that help us understand its explanation for the business cycle. And the first one is the idea of the structure of production. If you look at other schools of economic thought, they look at capital as being just a single variable, K. The Austrians consider that to be, again, unrealistic. That doesn't represent the real world. You can't say that, a steel plant is the same thing as a marketing firm, is the same thing as mining, is the same thing as wholesaling. I mean, there's a structure of capital in the economy. And what the Austrians say is that we should think of the structure of capital as proceeding in a series of stages from high to low. The highest stages are the stages of production that are the most remote from finished consumer goods. So, for example, research and development. Well, that could take 20 years before it bears any fruit. So that's a very high-order stage of production. Expanding mining capacity, likewise, high-order stage. By the time that actually trickles down to a consumer good, that's a long time. Manufacturing, construction, these things are high order. And then as you move down, you get to marketing, wholesaling, retailing, and then the lowest order stage of all would be services, because the consumer immediately consumes a service. So the low order stages are the ones that are geared most directly to consumer goods, and they produce them immediately. And the higher order stages are only going to bear fruit in terms of consumer goods in the relatively distant future. So high and low order stages is one point.